The courtroom felt cold, sterile, all polished wood and hushed tones that did nothing to calm the storm inside me. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my back straight, a discipline they'd never understand. The judge, a stern man with graying temples, peered down at me. "Ma'am, for the record," his voice rumbled, "I need you to state your full legal name and your current occupation." Across the room I saw my mother, Karen, a woman who prized appearances, above truth, leaned toward her lawyer with a contemptuous smirk. She was so sure of her victory, so confident in the story she had spun about her weak, flighty daughter. The air hung thick with her condescension. I let the silence stretch for a beat longer before my voice cut through. It, clear and steady, with a cadence she'd never heard from me before. "Lieutenant Elizabeth Ellis," I stated. "United States Marine Corps?" The court stenographer's hands froze. My mother's lawyer stopped writing, but my eyes were on her, on the way that smirk didn't just fade. It collapsed. To see her face then was to understand the lie she'd been living. That moment in court began 2 months earlier, in an office that smelled of old leather and entitlement. We were there to discuss the will of my grandfather, a proud Navy veteran who had been my quiet anchor. He had left me the two things he loved most: his classic Chevrolet and the workshop where he'd taught me the value of patience and precision. These weren't just things, they were his legacy. But my mother and my older brother, Mark, the family's golden boy who collected job titles like souvenirs, saw it differently. They were contesting the will. My mother, in front of a lawyer who was paid to believe her, painted a picture of me as a lost child. "She ran away to join the military," she said, her voice dripping with false concern because she just couldn't handle a real career. The words were like stones, each one a familiar weight. The lawyer listened, his face a mask of sympathy, as she delivered the final blow. "Honestly, what does she even do? Some little admin job on a base somewhere? She doesn't have the temperament to manage a real asset." She paused, then added the words that defined my childhood. "She was always the weak one." I didn't flinch. I just sat there, feeling a cold fury settle in my bones. It wasn't just about the workshop anymore. It was about every achievement of mine she'd dismissed. My mother didn't just think I was weak, she was willing to state it as a legal fact to steal my grandfather's legacy. She had no idea that the little admin job she mocked had forged me into a commissioned officer, and that I would use the very system she was trying to manipulate to bring her entire narrative crashing down. To understand the reckoning that followed, you have to understand the oath I took and the lies she told. To survive in my family, I had to learn how to live two completely different lives. In one, I was Lizzie, the quiet, sensitive daughter who never quite found her footing. I was a character in a story they had written for me, a story of gentle confusion and artistic sensibilities that, in their minds, made me fundamentally unsuited for the real world. In the other life, the one they never saw, I was Lieutenant Ellis. In that life, there was no confusion. There was only the mission, the objective, and the unwavering competence required to achieve it. For years, I kept those worlds separate, building a wall between them so thick I sometimes forgot which side I was truly on. I remember one Thanksgiving, the scent of turkey and my mother's expensive perfume filling the house. The entire afternoon was an ode to my brother, Mark, who had just been given a corner office at his marketing firm. A corner office. You would have thought he'd single-handedly negotiated world peace. My mother, Karen, beamed as she recounted the story for the third time to our visiting relatives, her voice swelling with a pride she reserved exclusively for him. He accepted the praise with his usual practiced ease, a golden boy who had never known a moment of self-doubt because my parents had absorbed it all for him. It was his world, we were all just living in it. Later, as everyone was settling into a tryptophan-induced haze, I made a quiet attempt to connect. "I finished my final course at OCS last month," I offered, hoping to share a piece of my own reality. "It was the most challenging thing I've ever done." My mother turned to me, her smile becoming something softer, more placating. She patted my hand, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like a dismissal. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her voice gentle, like a tough summer camp. "I'm so glad you found a little hobby you enjoy. Now, Mark is already on the track for a partnership, can you believe it? And just like that, the conversation pivoted back to him. My grueling 13 weeks of being physically and mentally broken down and rebuilt as a leader of Marines was reduced to a hobby, a summer camp. I felt that old familiar sting, the quiet erasure of my own existence. It wasn't just this one moment. It was the accumulation of 1,000 tiny cuts. When I was deployed, it was never a deployment, it was a trip. The immense responsibilities I held were just chores. My rank, the thing I had bled and sweat for, was never acknowledged. I wasn't Lieutenant Ellis, a commissioned officer in the United States Marine Corps. I was just Lizzie, the lost girl playing dress-up in a uniform they refused to understand. Their narrative was so powerful, so relentlessly consistent, that sometimes, sitting at that dinner table, I almost believed it myself. Then I would return to my other life. The real one. The world of Lieutenant Ellis was one of controlled chaos, of grit and consequence. I remember standing in a command tent at Camp Lejeune during a battalion-level field exercise. The air was thick with the smell of damp canvas, diesel fumes, and lukewarm coffee. Outside, the rain was turning the North Carolina clay into a thick, sucking mud. Inside, the rhythmic squawk of the radio was the only music. My uniform was stiff with dried sweat and dirt, my hair was pulled back in a severe functional bun, and I felt more myself than I ever did in my mother's pristine living room. A critical logistics convoy had been delayed by a washed-out road, and an entire company was running low on munitions and water. There was no room for error. I keyed the mic, my voice calm and even, betraying none of the pressure I felt. "Gunny," I said, speaking to my gunnery sergeant, a man with 20 years of experience and a face like a roadmap of every desert he'd ever been to. "I need a sitrep on the secondary route. Is it viable for the 7 tons? His voice crackled back, full of gravel and respect. "Affirmative, ma'am. Route is clear, but it'll be slow going. We're burning daylight." I processed the information, my mind mapping out the new timeline, calculating fuel consumption, and anticipating the ripple effects down the line. "Understood, Gunny. Get them rolling. I need confirmation and an updated accountability of all Class V assets as soon as you reach Checkpoint Alpha. We can't authorize Phase 2 until I have those numbers." There was no hesitation, no questioning of my authority, just a crisp, "Aye, ma'am." In that world, I wasn't weak. I was the officer responsible for the lifeblood of over 800 Marines. My decisions had immediate, tangible consequences. The respect I received wasn't given freely, it was earned every single day, through competence and unwavering devotion to the men and women I served. They didn't see Lizzie, they saw their lieutenant. They saw the one who made sure they had the bullets, the beans, and the bandages they needed to do their jobs and come home safely. In that tent, covered in grime and utterly exhausted, I held more power and purpose than my brother could ever find in his corner office. The disconnect was a chasm I didn't know how to bridge. I tried once in a phone call with my father, David, a quiet man who believed that avoiding a fight was the same as winning one. I had called him after another dismissive comment from my mother, my voice tight with a frustration I could no longer contain. I explained how it felt, to have every part of my life, every accomplishment, minimized into nothing. He listened with a series of tired sighs, the sound of a man who had long ago surrendered. "Lizzie," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "You know how your mother is. Her image is everything. Just don't make waves. It's not worth the fight." I waited for him to say more, to offer some defense of me, of his own daughter, but it never came. Instead, he delivered the line that finally severed the last thread of hope I had. "Besides," he added, "Mark's success, it's just so much more straightforward. It's easier for her to brag about to her friends. Easier. My life, my service, my sacrifices, they were inconvenient to her narrative. And my own father was advising me to stay small, to remain a footnote in my own family's story, simply because it was easier. The silence that followed was filled with everything I suddenly understood about my place in their world. I wasn't a person, I was a problem to be managed. For years, I let their narrative stand. I thought if I just worked hard enough, they'd eventually see me. But when my mother stood in a lawyer's office and weaponized my perceived weakness against me, I realized I was done trying to earn their respect. It was time to command it. The documents arrived on a Tuesday, in a thick, intimidating manila envelope. I sat at my kitchen table and read the words my own mother had authorized a lawyer to write about me. A history of emotional instability, lack of a fixed, responsible civilian career. Each phrase was a carefully crafted legal dagger, designed to paint me as the fragile, unreliable child she always needed me to be. There was no anger, not at first. Just a profound, icy clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. This was a declaration of war. For years I had tried to fight their narrative with emotion, with pleas to be seen, to be understood. But reading that filing, something inside me shifted. The hurt, frustrated daughter receded, and the Marine Corps officer took her place. There would be no tearful phone calls, no desperate arguments. My objective was no longer to win their love or approval. It was to correct the record with overwhelming and irrefutable proof. I wouldn't just defend my character, I would document it so thoroughly that her claims would evaporate under the harsh light of truth. My first call wasn't to a high-priced civilian attorney. It was to my base's JAG office. I explained the situation to a Marine captain on the other end of the line, not as a daughter, but as a fellow officer whose honor was being legally challenged. He didn't offer sympathy, he offered strategy. "Let them talk, Lieutenant," he advised, his voice all business. "Let them build their entire case on their assumptions. Let them spin their whole tale for the judge." He explained that our system, both civilian and military, is built on evidence. My service record, my fitness reports, my awards, they weren't just pieces of paper. They were sworn, documented testimony to my character. It was a brilliant plan, beautiful in its simplicity. It was a strategy of patience and precision, the kind of tactical thinking that had been drilled into me at Quantico. I instructed my lawyer to formally request that I be the last person to testify. Then, we subpoenaed my own official military personnel file directly from Marine Corps headquarters. This wasn't just for show, it established a legally unimpeachable chain of custody. It was a procedural masterstroke. My mother thought she was dragging Lizzie into a messy family drama. She had no idea she was stepping into a meticulously planned operation, designed by a logistics officer who leaves nothing to chance. My mother was preparing for a family drama. I was preparing for a court-martial. She brought opinions. I was bringing evidence. She had no idea that in a courtroom, a sworn oath and a decorated service record outweigh a mother's tears every single time. The day of the hearing arrived, and with it, a performance worthy of an award. My mother Karen took the witness stand dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, a picture of maternal concern. She clutched a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that remained stubbornly dry. Her voice, however, was a masterpiece of calculated sorrow. She spoke of my troubled youth, a fabrication spun from my quiet nature and love of books. She described my decision to enlist as aimless wandering, a desperate cry for help from a daughter she just couldn't reach. Every word was a lie, polished to a high sheen for the judge's benefit. I watched her, not with rage, but with a kind of detached fascination. It was like seeing all the small, casual dismissals of my life. The forgotten birthdays, the belittled achievements, the praise always diverted to my brother, condensed into one final grand deception. She leaned into the microphone, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I'm just so worried for her, Your Honor," she whispered, a perfect tear finally escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. "She needs structure, guidance. She's always been so fragile." I glanced at my brother Mark in the front row. He nodded gravely, playing his part as the responsible son, his expression a perfect blend of concern and superiority. My father sat beside him, looking down at his hands, a ghost in his own family's drama. "That's why my husband and I feel it's best we manage this inheritance for her," my mother concluded. "To protect her. To protect my grandfather's legacy from her instability, she had built her case." The image of Lizzie, the broken little bird, was complete. Then, she stepped down, her performance finished. My lawyer simply said, "We call Elizabeth Ellis to the stand." I rose, and the room felt different. As I walked toward the witness box, I could feel my family's eyes on me. They were expecting Lizzie to shuffle forward, eyes downcast and voice trembling. But that person was gone. My posture was perfect, a straight line from my heels to the crown of my head. My steps were measured and even, each one echoing softly on the courtroom floor. I didn't look at them. My focus was forward, on the judge, on the objective. This was no longer a family squabble. It was a formal proceeding, and I was about to follow protocol. I settled into the chair and looked directly at the judge. My lawyer opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up a hand, stopping him. He peered at me over the top of his reading glasses, his gaze neutral but intense. "Let's get the formalities out of the way first," he said, his voice a low baritone that commanded the room's attention. "Ma'am, for the record, I need you to state your full legal name and your current occupation." This was it, the moment my entire strategy hinged upon. I could feel my mother's smug certainty radiating from across the room, the final, condescending smirk before her inevitable victory. I took a steadying breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a second too long. Then my voice cut through it, crisp and unwavering. "Lieutenant Elizabeth Ellis, United States Marine Corps." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, deafening void where the sound of my mother's narrative used to be. The court stenographer's hands hovered over her keys, her rhythm broken. I saw my brother's jaw go slack. Before the shock could fully register, my lawyer stepped forward, his movements precise. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we would now like to enter into evidence Plaintiff's Exhibit A, Lieutenant Ellis's certified official military personnel file, which includes her fitness reports, proficiency marks, and this." He placed a single, pristine document on the judge's bench. "A citation for the Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal." My lawyer continued, his voice resonating with the weight of the words he was reading. "Awarded for superior performance of her duties during a critical joint service logistics operation." Every word, superior, performance, duties, was a torpedo aimed directly at the fiction my mother had so carefully constructed. The judge picked up the citation, his eyes scanning the formal text. I knew what it said. It spoke of leadership, of unwavering devotion to duty, of professional achievement under immense pressure. It was the official, documented truth of who I was, endorsed by an entity whose integrity was beyond question. The judge read the document slowly, twice. His expression, once impassive, shifted. He looked up, his gaze meeting mine with a newfound and unmistakable respect. Then he turned that gaze, now cold with contempt, upon my mother. Karen's face was ashen, a mask of chalky disbelief. The legal artifice, her entire identity as the long-suffering mother of a troubled child, had been obliterated by a single sheet of paper. She wasn't dealing with Lizzie anymore. She was being judged in the presence of an officer of the armed forces, a woman, whose character had just been vouched for by the United States government. The judge's tone was ice. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "you have testified under oath that your daughter is unstable and irresponsible. This official record, however, describes a decorated leader of Marines." He let the words hang in the air, a silent accusation. "The penalties for perjury are severe." He held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. "Do you have anything you'd like to add?" My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She just shook her head, a small, helpless gesture. She was speechless. The story was finally over. My mother had spent my entire life trying to write my story for me. In the end, it only took the United States Marine Corps 6 words to tell the truth. The judge's final words echoed in the silent courtroom, each one a nail in the coffin of my mother's narrative. "Petition dismissed," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth, "with prejudice." That last part was key. It meant she could never bring this case, this lie, before a court again. He went on, his ruling a scathing indictment of her credibility, citing the stark and irreconcilable conflict between her sworn testimony and the official, decorated record of a United States Marine. He never raised his voice, but the contained fury in his tone was more damning than any shout. It was a complete and total dismantling of her character, executed with the cold, sharp precision of the law. I watched as my mother, Karen, and my brother, Mark, practically fled the courtroom. They didn't look at me. Their faces, once so full of smug confidence, were now pale and drawn. They moved with the hurried, hunched posture of people who had been publicly shamed and were desperate to escape the scene of their humiliation. I felt no triumph watching them go, no surge of vindictive pleasure. Instead, what I felt was a profound and weary pity. They had built their world on a foundation of carefully curated images and convenient fictions, and I had just handed them a truth so heavy it brought the whole structure crashing down. As I left the courtroom, my lawyer met my eye and gave me a firm, respectful nod. "Well fought, Lieutenant," he said. And that was all that needed to be said. The victory wasn't emotional or messy. It was clean, professional, and absolute. A year can change everything. The inheritance I fought for was never about the money. It was about the principle, and about honoring the one man who had always seen me clearly. I funneled the estate's value into restoring my grandfather's workshop, transforming it from a dusty relic into a pristine, organized, and functional space. The smell of sawdust and old memories was replaced by the clean scent of motor oil, polished chrome, and fresh paint. His tools, once hung haphazardly, now rested in perfect order, gleaming under new LED lights. It became my sanctuary, a place of peace and purpose. And in that year, Lieutenant Ellis became Captain Ellis, a promotion earned through another 12 months of unwavering dedication. The workshop wasn't just for me, though. It became a place to build a different kind of legacy. On weekends, I started mentoring kids from a local youth program, many of them from tough backgrounds. I taught them the basics of engine mechanics, using my grandfather's classic Chevrolet as our classroom. I remember one Saturday, patiently showing a quiet, focused teenager named Maria how to read a complex engine schematic. "See," I explained, tracing the lines with my finger. "Every part has a purpose, and every connection matters. If you understand the system, you can fix anything." In her eyes, I saw not a lost cause, but a future engineer, a future leader. I wasn't just fixing a car, I was honoring my grandfather's legacy by using his gifts to serve and empower others. This was my new family. It wasn't a family bound by blood and obligation, but one forged in shared purpose and mutual respect. It was the easy camaraderie in phone calls with fellow Marines scattered across the globe, the laughter at a backyard barbecue with friends from my unit who knew my call sign better than my childhood nickname. It was the quiet pride I felt watching my mentees master a new skill. These people didn't need me to be a character in their story. They valued me for my competence, my leadership, and my character, the very things I had fought to prove in that courtroom. They saw me, the real me, without any explanation needed. One evening, my phone buzzed with a new email. My heart didn't race, my stomach didn't clench. I felt a calm curiosity as I opened it. The sender was my mother. The subject line was a single word: Elizabeth, not Lizzie. That alone spoke volumes. The message itself was short, stripped of all its usual drama and emotional manipulation. "I saw a picture of you in the local paper from a Veterans Day event," she wrote. "They called you captain. I was wrong. I'm sorry." I read the words over and over, not because they were shocking, but because of the feeling they produced in me, which was almost nothing. There was no surge of anger, no swell of triumphant joy. There was only a quiet, calm finality. The apology I had once craved for years had finally arrived, long after I had stopped needing it. I typed a simple, one-line response, "Thank you." Then, I moved the message from my inbox to the archive. My peace was no longer tied to her validation. The ledger was closed. I put my phone down, looked out at the lights of the city from my window. And for the first time in my life, I felt completely and utterly free. My family believed a legacy was a name you were given, and an inheritance you could take. I learned a true legacy is the honor you earn and the duty you uphold. If you've ever had to fight to be seen for who you truly are, share your story in the comments. In this community, your rank is always recognized.